I'm a pretty together guy, and I'm a reasonable thinker. But my co-parent counselor said to both my ex and I, you both have dealing with a lot of drama. You can benefit from therapies. So I said, well, give me the name of a therapist that's done a lot of work with divorced men. And I found this woman, and she was amazing. She was my rudder. Fortunately, I shut my mouth and I allowed myself to listen and learn. And I realized then, as the advice came out of her mouth, I mean, it was the opposite of what I intended to do, and she was 100% right, and I was 100% wrong. My book is by a guy who went through his own divorce, saw how he did some things right, he did some things wrong, some things kind of okay, and recognized that we got to get the advice of these experts and give it to people in 1 3 or 4 hour read. Almost every divorcee I interviewed, they said in the worst period of time, my ex said no to everything just because it came out of my mouth or my pen.
Welcome to the Too Dad to Quit podcast.
The podcast where we highlight stories of dads on the other side of divorce.
To inspire and give strength to dads going through it.
I'm Ben.
And I'm Yoel.
Welcome back to the Too Dad to Quit podcast. You can find us on twodadtoquit.com, Too Dad to Quit on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. And we are really excited to hear your own stories. Please reach out to us. We want to share your story because everybody has a story that can help our listeners and people around the world. I'm constantly getting feedback about how someone's story helped someone else that they didn't even know or didn't expect, and people are connecting. And really just reach out to us. We're building a community on Facebook, and we really want to hear from you. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share. And this week we are sitting down with Andy Heller. Andy Heller is a successful businessman and not a divorce professional, such as a divorce attorney, mediator, therapist, co-parenting counselor, or the host of other professionals that support and service those going through divorce. Among his professional accomplishments, Andy co-authored 2 best-selling real estate investment books in the 2000s. While the books were well received, Andy had no interest in writing another book. That decision changed after his own divorce. While navigating through his own divorce, Andy read countless support books to help him navigate through the process. While helpful, Andy identified a crucial hole in the self-help space for men and women navigating through divorce. Andy's book, Take the High Road, Divorce with Compassion for Yourself and Your Family, is his way of giving back with a stated goal of making the divorce process easier for those who are considering or who are on the divorce path. Several factors make his book truly groundbreaking. First, Andy brings a businessman's objective perspective into his counsel. Andy interviewed attorneys, divorcees, therapists, co-parenting counselors, mediators, special masters, and others to arrive at advice and guidance from the leading industry experts. Andy presents the guidance in 46 strategies, tools, and tips that, armed with the experience and counsel of these experts, the readers can themselves, hopefully, with their former spouses, and most importantly, their children, land in a healthier place in the months and years after the conclusion of their divorces. So, Andy, I really appreciate you joining us. I do want to get into the book. But I always like to understand who the person is behind the book. So I did some research. I understand you actually born in Canada and
Yes.
emigrated to the US. What age was that?
I was 10. Yeah. I still had all my teeth, so I didn't play a lot of hockey. But I grew up. So I'm a dual citizen, a Canuck and a Yank.
Nice. And now you live in San Francisco. Did you move to San Francisco?
Yeah, well, most of my professional career is back east in Atlanta, and as my marriage imploded, I also had to move myself across the country. Won't get into the reasons and the backstory there. So I moved because my ex and my children landed here, and I had a choice that some dads and some moms face. If I want to be an impactful parent, I've got to be close to my kids. And it wasn't convenient. It wasn't desirable, but I moved out west, and, it's a decision that I don't regret. So for many of us, we only have one time to be a dad. And, I didn't want to be a guy to send a check across the country.
Yeah, for sure. And so you grew up in the East Coast, or?
Yeah, I grew up in Florida,
Okay.
St. Petersburg to be precise, and then lived a few years in Tampa. Then I moved up to Atlanta shortly after college, and that was where I was most of my professional life.
And you got into real estate straight out of college? And that
No, so
was,
I had a career, and I eventually grew that career where I was running my own international freight forwarder. So I'm like a travel agent for cargo. On the side, I began buying real estate in the 90s, and I mean, some years I made more money in my side gig than I did in my profession, and it was a very good profession. And so crazy story, Ben. I just, on a whim, my real estate partner and we wrote a book about our model, which was kind of unique. And somehow our book got picked up by Fortune magazine. I started
wow.
getting calls to come and teach our strategy around the country. So I've done a number of things. I kind of say I have professional ADD. I've run my own international freight forwarding company. I've invested in real estate. I've taught real estate. I've written books about real estate. Where I am about divorce, as you said in my bio, I had no desire to write another book. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm a perfectionist, and the last thing you ever want to do is write a book if you're a perfectionist. It's like it's a match made in hell. So,
Yeah.
but I just like you said in the intro, I saw a gap in the space. I said I can fill this gap, and that's why I'm here talking to you guys today.
Yeah, and you mentioned in the book that you've been a note taker all your life, and that's kind of what got you to write this book. Doing all your research and pulling from other places, and so were you trying to create a book, or it just happened to be that you took all the notes and you were like, oh wow, I have something I can give back?
Yeah, so the short answer of how this worked out, everybody, is everybody has a different coping mechanism when they're stressed. With me, I don't sleep a lot, so I read, and I just start writing. When my mom was in hospice, I started writing because I was worthless. I couldn't work, and my notes became an article that got picked up in 5 newspapers in the States in the Mother's Day after she passed. So I'm having my own I had kind of a high conflict divorce, but today my ex and I are really in a great place. But so I'm writing all these notes just as a coping mechanism, Ben. And at the same time, I'm reading all these other books that are not bad, but not all encompassing. And something happened, an experience happened where so I went to a therapist. I'm a pretty together guy, and I'm a reasonable thinker. But my co-parent counselor said to both my ex and I, you both have dealing with a lot of drama. You can benefit from therapies. So I said, well, give me the name of a therapist that's done a lot of work with divorced men. And I found this woman, and she was amazing. She was my rudder. And I walked into her office. Something happened with my ex. I decided what the right course of action was, but I didn't act on it. I thought, well, I'm gonna meet with my therapist. I just want to let her know my plans. And again, I am in every group of friends, there's a guy or a woman who's a reasonable thinker, that you go to that person when they're stressed because he or she's going to give you a well thought through reply. I'm that guy in my group of friends. All right. So I went into the session. I said, this is what happened, but don't worry. I thought it through, and this is what I'm going to do. So she went into that whole therapy speak. Well, Andy, I'm glad you thought it through, blah, 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 but you're not going to do what you want. You're going to do the opposite. I'm like, what? And I was like, but, and she's like, Andy, here's why. And fortunately, I shut my mouth and I allowed myself to listen and learn. And I realized, Ben, as the advice came out of her mouth, I mean, it was the opposite of what I intended to do. And she was 100% right, and I was 100% wrong. So the takeaway when I went out of her office is I was not aware. Again, I'm that reasonable thinker, everybody. I'm not out there to hurt my ex. All right. And I don't think she's out there to hurt me. All right. and I'm pretty grounded. I look for ways to compromise. I try to see her point of view. I recognize in that therapy session the degree to which I was emotionally compromised and not making good decisions. And then I looked at my notes and I'm like, oh my God, I've got the outline for a great book. And then I started the process of interviewing field experts and taking their counsel and organizing their advice into a best practices manual for those that are going through divorce. So it was that one session where reasonable, compromise-oriented businessman Andy Heller recognized I am completely off. I'm just not thinking clearly. And many people don't have the means or the time or the ability to seek out a therapist who can be that rudder. So that's why I tried to create with my book. Identify 46 different situations that we divorcees are likely to find ourselves in. And I'll say this, it's not just about getting through the divorce. I'd say 60% of the book deals with post-divorce co-parenting. Co-parenting was somebody you couldn't live with under one household. But so give everybody in one 3 or 4 hour read a best practices manual for these 46 different situations that are most likely to occur in your world, and give you the therapeutic or the legal, the attorney or the mediator's guidance as to what you need to do if you're faced with that situation. And that's kind of where my book fills a gap, because a lot of books are written by an attorney specifically dealing with legal matters, by a therapist typically dealing with a certain the area of therapy, or by a mediator, by a co-parent counselor. My book is by a guy who went through his own divorce, saw how he did some things right, he did some things wrong, some things kind of okay, and recognized that we got to get the advice of these experts and give it to people in one 3 or 4 hour read.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciated the fact that it started. The preface, I think, was really nice, but also the beginning was take a pause. You know, if you're thinking about getting divorced, take a pause. You know, think about it and think about it and think about it again. I think we're in a world where you can turn on your phone and you can find out what's going on 6,000 miles away, and then keep scrolling for days and get lost. And people, it's much easier to get lost in something new than it is to spend the time to work on what you possibly have or used to have. There was something there. It didn't come from nothing. So I really did appreciate that you didn't just jump into the divorce advice right away, and you stressed, several times in the beginning of the book, if it comes to this, then do this. So I really appreciated that part. We're here more times than none when we ask for advice at the end of an episode. The first thing the person will say is, don't get divorced. But if you have to, and so I'm a big believer in that. So I did really appreciate that. I also liked, you can for sure see your business mind popping out in these, in kind of like a business plan. But I like how you had like role play, and like, if the mom says this, then the kid says this, and you gave real practical examples. And it's one thing to read it, but it's another to see it. So I really enjoyed how you were able to put that in there. I wanted to know, like, 46 things. Is there any significance to the number 46? Or is that just where the notes ended?
The honest answer is where the notes ended. I think one of the first versions had 52, 53. And again, I'll say this book is not about this guy, Andy Heller, who happens to be a guest on Ben's podcast, my divorce. what I did was I compiled the guidance of field experts and organized it like a business plan. So, but things that occurred from my interviews. So, oh, that's a chapter. Oh, that's a chapter. Oh, that's a good chapter. So eventually we had around 52, 53. Some of the chapters could be combined into similar points, could become one. And so there's no significance to number 46. What is significant, I'd say, is the 46 tips are divided into 4 stages that you go through. Okay, there's identifying the right divorce structure, negotiating. There is co-parenting. One of the strategies is the communications with your ex, parameters there. And another area is don't forget about yourself. And all these books and all these podcasts are all about, hey, take care of the kids, and that's correct. But if you're not making sure that your own mental space is somewhat healthy, given the drama you're dealing with, you're not going to be a great dad. You're not going to be a great mom. So taking care of yourself is not selfish. It's actually very important for your children. So just an example of what that means is that, when you get divorced, all of a sudden you've got your own things that you got to worry about. And then the roles that were done effectively by your former partner, you've got to acquire competence. So the time pressures involved are massive. All right. The last thing a lot of divorcees who will mean well think about are themselves, but you gotta. So for example, something as simple as, joining a book club, joining a softball team, joining a women's group, joining a men's a poker group where you meet once a week. So you've got something to look forward to every week. That's going to really help get you through the worst drama that you might be going through if you happen to be navigating a high conflict divorce. And that having something to look forward to for yours truly will help you be a better parent.
Yeah, for sure. So you mentioned, finding something, and I know, you said you read a lot of books and self-help and things like that. Were there any favorites that you kept by your side? You kept reading? Did you go through a million books? What was your process?
Well, I read a lot of books. There was one that wasn't necessarily for divorce, but how to talk so your kids listen, how to listen when your kids talk. There's a book that I referenced in my book, Biff, brief, informative, factual, and I can't remember what the other F is. I'm having a senior moment, but that's a great book. And I bring some of the best guidance of that book into my book. It's about communication guidelines. All right. This is probably the most challenging issue for us divorcees after you put your pen on the paper, your signature on the paper, and you finalize your divorce is communications. This is where things can really go south, or if you do it well, it can lead to improving your co-parenting relationship so you can raise these kids effectively with somebody you actually couldn't live with. All right. And so a lot of my book, for that reason, Ben, is dedicated to communication guidelines and situations you might find yourself in, and how to get through it with your ex. So yeah, Bill Eddy's book was a great book.
Yeah, and I know a lot of what it is called Take the High Road. So that there is that theme throughout the book. I've been grappling with, when 2 people are on board, that's a great idea. But when one of the partners is just not on board, a lot of the examples are kind of like, take the high road anyway, say thank you, say, be the consistent one. Again, I'm having a difficulty grappling with that idea completely. But I don't know, do you, all the experts that you spoke to, do you have any advice for the guys out there or wives out there that don't have that second partner who
Yes. Well,
want to
let me
take the
start
high
with
road? I
yeah.
guess
Let
is
me
the
start
best.
with the advice and then come back to the title. All right. You'll notice, everybody, one of the first chapters in my book is I identify for you, before you start reading anything else, that the advice given is unilaterally based. Why? Why is that important? Well, it's exactly what you just said, Ben. You're separating from somebody you could not make it work with under one household. It's not going to get better when you're in two. All right. And one of the most powerful and difficult. Okay, so let me take a step back. In all these interviews I did with couples who went through high conflict divorces, the number one thing they're complaining about, no matter what I do, she's going to do the opposite. No matter how reasonable I try to be, he's going to be a snot, blah, 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 blah. What's the common takeaway there is you can't control your ex. So the 46 tips and strategies are all unilaterally based, things that you can do yourself that don't require the other person's cooperation, yet many of them are designed to eventually bring the temperature down so your ex eventually is more capitulating and easier to work with. But the strategies have to be unilaterally based, because the only person you can control is yourself. And to the title, if I had to do it over again, I would actually pick a different title because it's misleading. Somebody sees take the high road, divorce with compassion for yourself and your family. Oh, this guy's talking about giving away the farm. No, I'm not. I'm not. And this advice, everybody, does not come from Andy Heller. It comes from attorneys who know a lot more than me. The more things you're fighting about, the more money you're going to spend, and the higher your stress level is going to be. So what take the high road really means, everybody. So let's say, Ben, there's 25 items that Jack and Jill are fighting about. All right? 25 items. Taking the high road means going to your attorney and saying, these are the 2 or 3 things that are important to me. Help me achieve this, or help me maximize these 2 or 3. And on the 22 that are less important, compromise, or give it to him, give it to her. So the point there, guys, is not capitulate everywhere, is capitulate and compromise strategically. And if you are basically being conciliatory on the bulk of the items on that list of 25, yet pushing back on the 2 or 3 that are really important to you, you're going to save money and you're going to have less stress, and the optics will be in your favor. The last point there is your attorney will love you. Here's why. In all these interviews I did, the attorneys consistently said one of the most difficult things were a lack of focus and control in their clients. So when you force yourself to give your attorneys 2 or 3 things that are important, you're helping yourself and your attorney. You're helping your attorney because he or she is now able to focus on what's important and not on what's unimportant. So you're not going to be that couple that spends $5,000 in legal fees arguing about a set of dishes that you didn't care about when you lived together. So that's really what Take the High Road is about being strategic and really, battling about only a smaller number of items that are really, really important and worthy of you pushing back a bit.
So something else I really found interesting in the book was how far before the divorce you get into the divorce planning. So, getting to a point where kind of you both agree, and then figuring out what kind of litigation arrangement you're going to do, and you give several options. And it was, again, it's like a business plan model. to it, as opposed to, much more emotionally charged divorces, which can happen. So I appreciated that. I don't know. I was kind of having PTSD reading the book in a good and bad way. So it, like I said, I was grappling with the book, just reading it, how, if I read it before, I don't know if it would have helped, but I liked how you wrote it out and you gave the options. Something in there that I really do like, and I think I might actually take to my day job as well, was give multiple options as different plans, as opposed to having lawyers fight back and forth. Offer multiple options. I really like that concept, and it was likened to a sales deal in business, where you give them, hey, you can buy one apple, or you can buy 5 apples, or you can buy 1 apple into 2 pairs. Which one do you want? And then they'll spend more time comparing the 3 deals than trying to find a better lawyer, I guess, is the idea. I found that made a lot of sense. I identify with that one. That one made a lot of sense. So you, I guess you were divorced in 2014. Is that correct?
Yeah, the separation was in 2013. We finalized our divorce at the end of 2014.
Okay, and your kids were how old at the time?
6 and 8.
Wow.
Yeah.
Right.
So now I've got one in college and one in high school who knows all the answers and is telling me every day how stupid dad is.
Yeah, you're raising them right then.
Yes, I am.
So I'm assuming the book also came from lessons learned. So were you one of the dads that didn't know how to cook and had to learn all of these things? Did you know all that stuff beforehand?
Yeah.
What was
So
that
that's a great
transition?
question. So let me answer this. This book, everybody, is not about Andy Heller's divorce, but some of my own struggles and well as successes became chapters because I saw others could benefit from that. And one of the chapters that Ben is referring to is one of my favorite chapters, was talking about change in roles. And in a typical household, one spouse handles the things that he or she is good at, the other spouse handles the things that he or she is really good at, and there's a few things that both do somewhat equally. All right. In my own world, we had what you might call a traditional or old-fashioned marriage. My spouse was a super homemaker, great cook. She knew PTA and active in the kids' schools, all the friends, the doctors, and everything. I was kind of a hardworking dad, and I was a very involved father. All right, but I was the sole breadwinner. Okay, so when we split up, we both had a lot of pressures on changing roles. My ex, she now, well, there was support, of course, but she had to go back in the workforce because that support is going to run out. And so she had the massive pressure of identifying a career, and she'd been out of the workforce for over a decade. Me, on the other hand, one of my stressors, Ben, was I had to learn how to cook. And I was determined not to be mac and cheese dad. And my kids at the time of separation, everybody listen to this, they were gluten-free, nut-free, and lactose intolerant. So imagine teaching yourself how to cook with those 3 buckets of restrictions. All right, impossible. Yet I rolled up my sleeve and I was determined to be able to cook healthy meals for my kids. I had to get to know all the doctors. I wanted to have a presence at the kids' school. So I started focusing on a level of competency on the roles that my former partner managed really well. She had to raise her competency in a lot of areas that were my domain. The pressure and challenges of this, everybody, is really, really difficult. So this was my own experience and struggles there became a chapter. And it's funny, I've done a number of podcasts to promote my book, everybody. And there's a few chapters that almost every podcaster asked me about, and that's one of them. And they said, this is not in any other books. Nobody talks about this need to take an inventory of what you're good at and what you're deficient at. And this is one of the things that you really ideally want to do before you separate into two households.
Right. So speaking of that, how, like I said, you started way before the divorce in the book. How much time prep before starting the divorce process is a good amount of time? Because,
well, I'm going to answer your question with an asterisk. It really depends on the ability to communicate with your spouse as you're separated. In your more toxic divorces, the more time, the better. In your less toxic divorces, sometimes you don't need a lot of time because you're able to talk about these things. And probably a top 3 challenge in divorcing. I'm not talking about the kids right now. A top 3 challenge is communication can often be at a low point when the couple is splitting, but it needs to be at a high point because you're going to be creating your own household. He or she's creating their own household, and you've got to be coordinating. You got to be coordinating schedules, kids obligations, this and that. But some of these couples can't talk. So in these cases, the more time you have, the better, because you can involve a third party, which we talk about in the book, to help you navigate that separation so you don't screw up your kids, everybody. So I'd say it's less about an amount of time as a standalone answer, and it's the amount of time relative to the toxicity of your relationship. The more challenging your communication is, probably the more time you need.
yeah, it's interesting. I always say, I feel like, well, 70% of divorces nowadays are initiated by the women. And to me, it's like, I don't know, they want to start over, or they know what the issues are and they just have given up and don't want to fight for it, or whatever the reason is. And they want to start again, I guess is the best way to put it. However, if you have kids, the things that were probably the problems, for it to actually work for the kids, the communication has to be better than it ever was, because now you're not in each other's house. The parenting has to be working together more than you ever did because they're not in the same house. So all these things that were issues before, if you don't work on them 20-fold, then it's going to be worse than it ever was. And to me, I always say it's so interesting that, there's this whole new start mentality and everything will be better because we're the problem, but maybe we're also the solution, because once you're not in the same house, you're going to have to work 25 times harder with someone that you didn't want to work with before.
Yeah. And for those of you who may be a little bit getting depressed thinking about that, or you're in that already, I can help you, because a lot of my book deals with how to raise your kids effectively when you have an uncooperative or combative former partner. And probably a lot of the men and women who listen to your podcast are in that situation. Like, I'm trying to be the reasonable one, but no matter what I do, he or she does the opposite or whatever. The one thing I'll say to all of you is, I get it. And again, I don't want to be like always that rose-colored glasses, but a lot of the strategies that I offer in my book, some of them borrow from business strategies for high conflict situations, but they are unilateral things you can do designed to get your former partner to change their obstructive behavior. Let me give a great example of what that means, Ben.
Please.
So one of the funnest chapters to write about, so I do all these interviews, and one of these almost every divorcee I interviewed, they said in the worst period of time, my ex said no to everything just because it came out of my mouth or my pen. Okay, so how do business, what is there a business strategy for high conflict business situations? Yes, there is. And before I created this chapter, I met with a therapist who said, not only is that brilliant, Andy, I want to see this chapter when you're done with it, I'm going to start using this in my practice. So what this involves is changing the texture of your communication so that your spouse, who's going to say no to whatever you write, owns the suggestions. In other words, you define the problem and you defer for a solution. Now, what are you hoping for? Sometimes the response will be very close to what you were going to suggest. And then in the first place, but you're able then just to say, great idea, I agree with you. If it's not close, but it's maybe a step or two closer, you say, great, I like this part. I still think we have a question. All right. So it's a process in 1 to 3 or 4 steps. Getting your former spouse's response to resemble what you would have suggested anyhow, but allowing him or her to own it. So it changes how you communicate. Instead of offering solutions, you define everything in terms of a question. And again, this is an example where I actually give you how you should communicate in that chapter. This is so helpful, guys. And eventually, because your former spouse will appear to be, oh my God, he's always letting me get my way. Oh, she's always letting me get my way. You'll actually then, you won't have to do that long term. Eventually, you can actually change and go back to a normal way of communicating. But this is a business strategy that's used in high conflict business situations over multi-million-dollar deals. You can do it with your ex when you debate whether Johnny should continue to go to ballet or play basketball.
Nice. There's a graphic in the book about how quickly you should get divorced. And so there's basically 2 lines. One of them is it has a heart that's cracking and then a broken heart. And then when the divorce is quickly, so I guess 2010, 2011, and then your new partner, or is that what the last one is? I'm trying to remember. Yes. And then there's another one underneath it where it's, the same thing with the heart and the broken heart and then the divorce paper, but it's like 5-year difference, and then the new partner. And it's worded very, I don't know, romantically, smartly, the way it's put, but basically, it's, I like to say the first date should only be 45 minutes because the first date is really to just see if there should be a second date.
Mm-hmm.
So why drag it out if you don't know if you want to have that second date? Get that first date done and see where you guys stand and then move forward. So this to me was kind of the same thing where, the whole point of the divorce is to be able to start your new life. So the faster you have the divorce, the sooner you can heal to start your new life and find a new partner. I just thought the graphic was done really well. And the concept, some people get so caught up in the divorce and the fight and the lawyers and the whole deal, and they forget that there's something new ahead. And I really liked how you stressed that, and that, that one hit me, pretty hard.
Yeah, and let me add to what you just said. Thank you for the compliment, Ben. A number of the interviewees who I interviewed, couples, said they stayed married for reasons such as taxes or insurance. They stayed married longer for whatever the reason was. Well, from the therapeutic community advises against this, guys and gals, because as Ben was saying, if divorce is the right path for you, you want to get there as fast as possible so you can get to that next stage of your life. And even though you may think that, well, I'm just doing this for taxes, I'm just doing this for insurance, you're also delaying your ability to get on the other side of that fence. So that is a very powerful point, that if divorce is the right decision for you and your current partner, then get there as fast as you can so you can begin that next phase of your life as fast as possible. Don't stretch out the divorce process any longer than it needs to be.
Yeah, and one thing I don't think was covered in the book is, when there's one spouse that wants a divorce. I know there's one or two lines in there that it takes two partners to save a marriage, but only one to break it up. But
yes,
there wasn't anything specific, if one partner wants the divorce and the other one isn't on board, which I guess it would be the person who wants it, what they should be doing to get the other one on board, or vice versa.
I did cover that. All right, but it wasn't its own chapter. It was mixed in 2 or 3 chapters where we say, okay, if this is the path, and I don't specifically say if one party or the other is talking about it, pause, call up your partner, say, let's take a walk on the beach. Let's just see, is this something we both want to do? If you're the one that thinks we need to separate, again, pause. Think about that time you had a passionate weekend. Think about that one time you hit a life challenge and he or she said the perfect thing to you at the perfect time. Slow down and make sure that this is the right path. So the advice to pause, to engage your current partner in a conversation, I believe, Ben, that is the same advice if both of you feel it's time to separate or only one of you feels. And so the advice to slow it down and pause and have that conversation, are we both on that page? But if the answer is yes, and if one of the parties is adamant, you can't stay married if only one of you wants to be there. And that's unfortunately just the sad reality of divorce. And then, of course, if there's a third party involved, there's oftentimes it really limits what one can do if you want to stay in the marriage.
Sure. And the second part of the title is and family. So I know, just talking to you, that's a very important thing to you, and it should be the most important thing. You have some chapters in there about how to talk to the kids about divorce, what to say or not to say about the other spouse, the other ex. Can you touch on that just a little bit?
Sure. I'm going to give you something
boundary based.
Yep.
And I like
that. I'm going to give you something that's not in other books. Most of the books that I read on some level touched on what you should or shouldn't say about your ex. All right. How to talk to the kids. You tell them that this is not about you. It's not your fault. But mom and dad are just, the right thing to do is we still love you. The right thing to do is separate. That's also in my book. And the language of how to do this is in my book. But there's something that is not in other books that I did include that was one of the most fascinating things I learned when I did these interviews with field experts. So everybody says, don't berate your former spouse to your children. There's nothing new there in me saying the same thing. But one of the things that is different, and I touch about this in the book, that was fascinating for me to learn. A therapist told me that the youngest of kids, 5, 7, whatever, kids all understand intuitively two things. They are half the DNA of a biological dad and half the DNA of a biological mom. They understand that intuitively. So when a divorcee goes to his child and say, your mom has done this, and that's why the marriage didn't work. Your dad always did this, and he blew up the marriage because of this quality. The child interprets this because they are half the DNA of the spouse that's being, the parent is being criticized, as self-criticism. And it affects their self-esteem and their ability to be a well-adjusted, grow into a well-adjusted adult. So this is, I honestly, Ben, I had a holy smokes moment when I learned it, is you're right. You can't criticize your former ex for a number of reasons, but one of the reasons why you can't do it is because it harms the child's self-esteem.
Yeah.
Just wow. It was a wow moment for me.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Speaking of children, this is a Two Dad to Quit podcast, and we love for our guests to share one of their Two Dad to Quit moments, a moment where you were proudest as a dad, and when you think about it, you light up. And when someone asks you how the kids are doing, this might be one of those stories that you just blurt out of your mouth without even thinking.
All right. Can I give you a 2-minute story?
Yeah, for sure.
All right. So in my household, everybody, and this book is not about me, but a couple of things lessons I learned or things that happened went into the book, but never about me. It would be in third person. One of the chapters about perseverance. It talks about the importance of rolling up your sleeve to be that kind of dad or mom that you want to be. Growing up in my household, on Friday nights, we had family dinners. They were like family dinner always. And as I got older, I would go out at night, but we had the family dinner first. Okay. It was family time. How was the week? What do you got planned this weekend? Whatever. So that was a really special time. And in my own divorce, my business was on the East Coast, Ben. And in our separation agreement, I had that if I was gone for a week, I got the kids right away when I got back. All right. So I would typically fly back from the East Coast, first flight out on Friday morning, get the kids, and right away from school. But how in the world I could have this great family dinner when I wasn't around to prepare it? All right. Second issue was I realized I predicted accurately that, 'cause I had young kids, everybody, that some of the families in the community are just not going to be comfortable having their kids over at a single dad's place. And look, we live in a progressive time, but some concerns can be very, very dated, but that's just the way our society works. And I was completely correct there. So I decided to use these Fridays dinners to check off 2 boxes. So how did I create this Friday dinners when I wasn't around? I would go ahead and I would prep the dinner the week before. I'd cook it, all right? And then I'd freeze it. I would invite a family of one of my children's friends to Friday night dinner. so they could have a chance to get to know me as a single dad in a safe environment. I went ahead and I paid a college kid to take this prepared meal out of the freezer so it could defrost on Thursday night. All right. So I caught the first flight out, which meant I got up around 2:30 in the morning Pacific time to catch the first flight out to land on the West Coast late morning. If I was lucky and my flight's on time, I got a run in. All right. Did my emails on the plane. All right. Then showered, got the kids from school, got them back, did my homework, worked out a carpool for my daughter going to dance. Then I took my son to soccer practice where I was the coach. This assistant also got the fresh vegetables. I got back, quick shower by 6 o'clock, put the meal in the oven, prepped the fresh stuff, presented myself. The table is already set. The people come in around 7. We have this great, well-cooked dinner. They're getting to know me. I'm getting to know them. They're okay to have their kids at the house safe. They feel safe with me going forward. They say goodbye around 9:30, clean up. I start watching my daughter's like, Dad, let's watch a movie together. And she's all upset at me. Dad, you can never stay awake during the whole movie. My kids were oblivious that this was the end of almost a 24-hour marathon for me, all to give them the same experience that I had. The
Wow.
point of this was, and I took such pride in these dinners, and it was very powerful. Now I'm speaking to the men on your podcast. Some of these parents even said to me, I really wasn't sure about you until you had us over for a guest. I saw how hard you were working to make those Friday night dinners happen. And I was very comfortable after that to have my kids over at your home.
Yeah.
So perseverance, guys and ladies, is really, really important. Divorce is hard because for us parents who want to be good parents, you're doing the work of two, but you're one human being. And sometimes rolling up the sleeves and working your butt off to create these experiences for your kids. And if they're young, they may be oblivious to everything you did to make that happen. It's going to make you feel so proud. So that was one of my special, and I can still remember, Ben, my daughter, and she still talks today. You'd always fall asleep when we would watch family movies. Like, if you only knew what Dad had done.
Nice.
That's what she remembers. Not
Yeah.
that the meals were good, not that her friends' families came over for dinner, that Dad fell asleep in the movie after our guest left.
Nice. And the last thing we like to leave our listeners with is some advice that you would give them. I know we went through tips and tricks, but any advice or that, if you would like to give yourself maybe before your divorce, that our listeners could benefit from, because a lot of them aren't even divorced. They're going through divorce. They're thinking about it. Somebody might hear this episode and be like, wow, I need to read that book with my spouse, and maybe we're making a wrong decision. So any advice would be great.
Yeah, I'm going to give a great one that many people don't focus on. Don't worry about what your life will look like the day after you sign your divorce document. Envision and worry about how you want your life to look like a year later. And a great example of what that point means is that a lot of people are worried about the custody percentage. All right. But a great example is a woman who travels for her job. All right. She wants 50% custody. She's a great mom. But the reality is she travels for her job. And with that travel, the kids are already used to being alone with Dad, but not being alone with her. So day one, the therapist says, why don't you focus on about 30%? All right. Get your business world to react to your new reality. And over the next year and a half, let's get you slowly up to 50%, as long as your kids are comfortable and are well adjusted. So this is a great example and this is an actual person. She did not, she got 30% on day one. And in her divorce document, everybody, there were periods at which this percentage would increase. So she was focused on how she wanted her life to look at after a year or so, not on the first day. She deserved 50. She was an involved mom, but she recognized the reality that her kids were not used to being alone with her. They were used to being alone with dad. So divorce is a marathon, everybody, not a sprint. And if you focus on how you want your life to look a year or two later, you'll probably get a healthier agreement, and you'll be able to adjust to that world, and just take the time to land in a good and safe place.
Great advice. So thank you, Andy. I really appreciate your time, and it was lovely talking to you. And thank you, everyone. This is the Too Dad to Quit podcast, and we will see you next week.
This podcast provides a platform for our guests to express their own personal views and opinions. Some or all of these views and opinions may not be shared by Ben and or Yoel.
Thank you for listening to the Too Dad to Quit podcast. Available at toodadtoquit.com. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next episode.